The doors opened behind Commander Elias Varen with a sound like judgment made physical. Not loud. Heavy. Final. The kind of sound built into ancient chambers by species that wanted every visitor to feel, in the center of their bones, that they were entering a place where power had been old long before their own world had learned to speak. He did not slow when he heard it. He did not straighten his back, because it was already straight. He did not force calm onto his face, because calm was all he had left to wear. He walked forward across the black mirror floor of the Concordium Hall, the polished stone throwing back a dark reflection of every step, every measured breath, every silent eye fixed on him from above. 12 thrones curved around the room in a high crescent. 12 species. 12 governments. 12 civilizations old enough to call themselves patient. Each throne had been shaped according to the culture that occupied it, one grown from living crystal, one carved from volcanic glass, one built in layered rings of pale bone, one woven from flexible metal that seemed almost soft until the light struck its edges and showed how sharp it truly was. In every one of them sat a representative of the Accord. And every one of them was watching the single human in the center of the floor. That, more than the architecture, more than the history in the air, more than the silence arranged like a weapon around him, was what mattered. They had all come. Which meant they were afraid. Elias stopped exactly where the chamber intended him to stop. There was a circle set into the black floor there, not marked by color, not bordered by railings, just a subtle difference in sheen that told every visitor where the judge stood and where the judges remained above them. He looked up. No one spoke at first. That was deliberate too. The Accord liked silence. It believed silence made lesser beings nervous, and nervous beings were easier to read. It usually worked. Today, Elias thought, it was being wasted. At the center throne sat High Convener Salvek, a pale, long-limbed elder of the Ythren line whose face always looked as if it had been carved out of old wax and left too close to heat. His hands rested on the arms of his throne with ceremonial stillness, but Elias saw the truth in the tension of the fingers. To Salvek's right sat Minister Osha of the Delvar, bronze-skinned and severe, her crest folded flat against her skull in a sign Elias had learned meant tightly controlled agitation. To the left, Envoy Turin of the Vey Republic stared down at him with the frozen composure of someone who had been handed a mathematics problem and was beginning to suspect the numbers themselves had betrayed him. Around them, the others waited. Some angry. Some uneasy. Some already calculating what new shape the galaxy might take depending on what Elias said next. He let them wait 1 second longer. Not for effect. For himself. Just long enough to feel the weight of the sealed note inside his inner pocket. Just long enough to remember the names spoken over the casualty list 3 weeks earlier. Just long enough to see, behind his own reflection in the polished floor, the image of a colony sky burning over glass fields where families had gone to sleep believing they were far enough from history to live ordinary lives. 82,411. That was the number as of this morning. The dead had not become less dead because diplomats had finally become frightened enough to summon him. The High Convener rose. The motion was smooth, formal, and very old. Commander Elias Varen, Salvek said. His voice was thin but carried perfectly, designed by long practice to fill the chamber without effort. You stand before the full Accord at a moment of unprecedented emergency. Elias said nothing. He had already noticed the emergency. It was in the room. Salvek continued. 3 weeks ago, the Caris Dominion struck your frontier colony of Meridian Vale. Civilian population center. Non-military infrastructure. Total devastation. Still Elias did not answer. Not because he objected. Because he knew these people only used words like devastation when the dead belonged to someone else for long enough that they could become category instead of grief. Salvek's expression tightened by a fraction. We are informed, he said, that human losses exceed 80,000. 82,411, Elias said. The words landed harder because he spoke them quietly. A slight shift passed through the thrones. He continued before anyone could answer. And 36 missing. Although if your definition of unprecedented emergency requires precision, High Convener, then I recommend precision. Silence. Not the chamber's chosen silence this time. A real one. The kind that appears when someone speaks too plainly inside a room built on ritual cushioning. Minister Osha leaned forward first. The accord extends its deepest. Don't, Elias said. It came out gentler than she deserved, and that bothered him. Osha stopped. 12 pairs of eyes sharpened at once. Elias lifted his gaze fully now, meeting one throne after another without hurry. Do not offer me your sorrow, he said. Not today. Not after 212 years of border petitions, sanctions debates, non-interference motions, and strategic patience while the Dominion cut apart world after world because its core systems were shielded behind geography no one wished to pay to overcome. No one interrupted him. That surprised them more than the words. He kept going. You had reasons. Many of them even sounded wise when spoken slowly enough. I'm sure the records will show admirable restraint. Now the tension in the room was visible. Good. He wanted at least that much honesty. Envoy Turan rose part-way from his throne. Commander, you were not summoned here to insult the accord. Elias turned his head slightly. No, he said. I was summoned because the Dominion finally made the mistake of touching us. The statement hung there. No one denied it. Because that was the truth no one in the chamber could argue against. For 2 centuries the Dominion had been a problem. For 3 weeks it had been a human problem. And that, Elias could now see in every strained face looking down on him, had changed the emotional geometry of the galaxy. High Convener Salvek lowered himself slowly back into his throne. When he spoke again, the ceremonial edge was gone. Then let us proceed without ornament. That was better. Elias said nothing. Salvek folded his long hands together. The Kari's dominion cannot be reached by conventional fleet action without catastrophic losses. Its inner worlds remain protected by the Helion Shear. You know this. I do. And yet, Salvek said, we also know your people have spent the last 47 years developing operational doctrines outside conventional fleet logic. There it was. The true subject. Not grief. Not justice. Possibility. The room was no longer asking what happened at Meridian Vale. It was asking whether humanity had already become the answer to a question older species had been too tired, too cautious, or too civilized to solve. Minister Osha spoke next, voice clipped and hard. For 200 years the Dominion has used its position to make a mockery of every collective security guarantee the Accord has attempted to build. It raids, it eradicates, it withdraws behind impossibility. We know what it is. We know what it has done. But now. She stopped. Something like revulsion passed across her face. Now it has struck Earth-allied territory. The word now did most of the work. Now it mattered differently. Now the young species with a soft skin and short history and unpleasant reputation for building solutions in secret was personally involved. Now every ancient government in the room wanted to know whether the trait they had spent decades privately mistrusting in humanity might also be useful. Envoy Turan finally said what the room had been circling. If your people possess a means of ending the Dominion, he said, the Accord will authorize its use. Not request. Authorize. Elias almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because it was late. The others joined in then, one after another, abandoning ceremony, abandoning sequence, abandoning the slow and layered etiquette that usually governed this chamber. We will support the action. Full logistical access. Transit corridors opened. Fleet staging rights. Shared intelligence. Emergency wartime exemptions. Every offer translated into the same plea. Do what we could not. Be the thing we were afraid you might be, but be it for us. At last High Convener Salvek raised one hand and the room fell silent again. When he spoke, it was with the careful directness of someone stepping onto ice he knows may not hold. Commander Elias Varen, he said, on behalf of the Accord, I place before humanity a formal request. End the Karis Dominion. End it completely. There it was. The true summons. Not apology. Not alliance. Permission. The whole chamber waited. They expected many things, Elias realized. Some expected anger. Some expected satisfaction. One or two, perhaps, expected triumph. Most expected at least one visible crack in him, a sign of the dead he carried, a signal that however calm he seemed, he was still standing inside fresh grief and would answer from there. Instead, Elias stood in the center of the black circle and felt something colder than grief settle cleanly into place. He thought of the sealed file in his pocket. He thought of the woman who had smiled at him over untouched tea in a desert room 9 months ago and asked the only moral question in the whole project worth respecting. He thought of a timer already running somewhere far beyond the reach of this chamber. Then, at last, he spoke. "You are asking humanity," he said, "to destroy the Dominion." No one moved. "Yes," said Salvek. Elias nodded once. The movement was small, almost courteous. "When," he asked, "were you planning to ask?" The question hit them wrong. They could feel it but not yet understand it. Minister Osha frowned. "Commander, this is not a time for rhetoric." "No," Elias said. "It isn't." He looked from throne to throne again. At fear. At calculation. At old power trying very hard to remain old power. Then he gave them the line that would divide the room's history into before and after. "You are not authorizing anything," he said. His voice remained calm. That was what made it worse. "The Dominion is already finished." Nothing moved. No one breathed. For a moment the chamber itself seemed to forget how sound worked. Then Envoy Turin said, very quietly, "Explain." Elias did not. Not yet. Instead he turned slightly, as if measuring the long walk back to the doors. "When this council asked humanity what kind of species we intended to become," he said, "you should have understood that we had already been asking ourselves the same question for a very long time." High Convener Salvek rose halfway, all stillness finally broken. "What have you done?" Elias looked up at him. Not proudly. Not apologetically. Simply as one adult might look at another who has arrived too late to a necessary truth. "The better question," he said, "is when you realized you should have asked sooner." He turned then and began walking toward the doors. Voices broke behind him all at once. Not words at first. Shuck. Then commands. Questions. His name. Security protocols. Demands. The black floor caught all of it and threw it back in broken reflections as he walked away without haste. At the threshold, with the doors already beginning to part, he stopped just once and glanced over his shoulder. 12 thrones. 12 species. 12 governments suddenly aware that the youngest power in the room had been carrying something in silence long enough to make all their urgency irrelevant. "In 7 hours," Elias said, "you'll have your proof." Then he stepped out into the corridor and let the chamber doors close behind him on the sound of history beginning to panic. The corridor outside the Concordium Hall was quiet in the way only powerful places ever were. Not truly silent. Silence in political stations was never real. Too many hidden vents, too many unseen systems, too many distant engines carrying old structures through vacuum and history. But the noise here had been designed to stay beneath attention. The soft hum of climate controls. The low vibration of gravitic stabilizers running somewhere behind the walls. The whisper of light panels set into black stone. All of it made one thing clear. This was a place built for thoughts to sound important. Elias Varen walked through it without slowing. Behind him, the doors of the hall remained shut. The shouting inside had not yet found a way out through 10 tons of ceremonial alloy, but he could imagine it well enough. Salvek demanding clarity. Osha demanding records. Turin already trying to model strategic consequences from incomplete information. 12 old powers colliding with the same problem at once. Humanity had done something, and they had not been asked first. A measured set of footsteps fell into rhythm behind him 3 seconds later. Not hurried. Controlled. He didn't have to turn to know who it was. Commander Lisa Wren matched his pace on his left side, one hand folded behind her back, the other holding a sealed slate she clearly had no intention of reading until this moment was understood. She was 32, severe in profile, unreadable in posture, and had spent the last 4 years serving as his operations adjutant with a particular competence that made other officers seem noisier than they were. Her uniform was still immaculate. That lasted exactly until she spoke. "What," she said very evenly, "did you just do?" Elias kept walking. "The formal answer or the useful one?" "The useful one. I informed the Accord that its timing is poor." Lisa stopped walking for half a beat, then caught up again with visible restraint. "That was not information, sir. That was an explosion in sentence form." "Then it was efficient." She turned her head and looked at him fully now. Not scandalized. Not angry. Trying to decide whether he had just gambled the diplomatic architecture of half the known galaxy on one controlled act of theater. And because she knew him well enough, she was also trying to determine whether the theater had been deserved. That room, she said, contained 12 governments with military authority over half the major transit lattice, and every one of them now believes humanity ended the Dominion without consultation. "Yes. You are saying that as if this is not a problem. It may become one." "May." He almost smiled. There was no humor in it. Only recognition. Lisa had earned the right to ask directly, which was why he had brought her here at all. Most officers could handle orders. Fewer could handle the shape of the world after the orders worked. Ahead, the corridor curved around the outer edge of the hall's diplomatic wing, opening into a long observation passage cut with narrow windows that showed the red-white burn of the station's companion star against the black. The light spilled in sharp bands across the floor and over the side of Lisa's face as they walked. At the far end of the passage, 2 Accord guards straightened when they saw him. Neither moved to block the way. That told him enough. The chamber had not yet decided what category he now belonged to. Useful. Dangerous. Temporary. Irreplaceable. It didn't matter. Not tonight. "Sir," Lisa said, her voice lower now, more careful. "If what you told them is true, then either we have just completed an operation whose existence was hidden from this entire theater of government, or you lied to the full Accord Council in open session." "Yes." She looked at him again. "That answer is getting old. It remains accurate." They reached the end of the observation corridor and turned into a smaller side hall leading toward the secured transit lifts. This section was emptier. Cleaner. Private enough that he finally stopped walking. Lisa stopped with him. For a moment neither of them spoke. The station lights here were dimmer, gold rather than white. They softened the edges of the dark walls and left the two of them standing in a narrow pool of stillness between one collapsing truth and the next. Then Elias reached into the inner pocket of his coat and withdrew a slim black device no larger than a hand span. Not a weapon. Not a badge. Just a sealed military timer. He pressed his thumb to it. The screen came alive. 6 hours 47 minutes and 13 seconds. The digits began to move immediately. 6 hours. 47 minutes. 12 seconds. 11. 10. Lisa stared. He watched her see it. Not the number first. The meaning of the number. This was not an estimate. Not a projection. Not an if. This was a clock already in motion. Her eyes lifted from the device to his face. When did that start? 30 days ago. She did not react outwardly at first. Then one inhale changed shape halfway through and she had to force the rest of it flat. 30 days, she repeated. And nobody in Accord intelligence saw. They were not meant to. Neither was I. That one landed where it should. Elias looked at her for a moment before answering. No. The answer hurt more for its simplicity. Lisa folded her arms. Not defensively. To keep still. How many people know? He could have lied. Smoothed it. Said enough or the necessary number or any of the polished evasions political officers used when truth carried edges. Instead he gave her the only version worth giving. Before tonight, he said, 7. She absorbed that in silence. Then. And now. 8. The timer continued to count down in the gold-lit hall between them. 6 hours 46 minutes and 28 seconds. 6 hours 46 minutes and 27 seconds. 6 hours 46 minutes and 26 seconds. Lisa's eyes narrowed slightly. Why me? Because in less than 7 hours, Elias said, the structure of 1,000 years of regional power is going to fail all at once, and when it does, I need one person beside me who can distinguish shock from consequence. That sounds flattering enough to be suspicious. It was meant to be useful. She looked back at the timer. What happens at 0? Elias let the question sit. Not to build drama. To make sure he answered the thing she was actually asking. Not what is the operation. Not what did we do. But what kind of world begins when that timer ends? At last he said, at 0, the Kharis Dominion stops being a civilization. The words entered the corridor and seemed to absorb its quiet rather than disturb it. Lisa did not answer. He could almost hear her running the possibilities in order, rejecting each one as impossible and moving to the next. Orbital strike? No. Mass fleet engagement? Impossible without signatures. Biological release? Wrong timeline. System sabotage? Not at that scale. Cognitive attack? She looked up sharply. Not because she had solved it. Because she had finally reached the edge of what ordinary categories could hold. You're serious. He said nothing. She exhaled once, slowly, and the discipline in her face shifted from polished military composure into something rarer and harder, active adjustment. How complete? She asked. Total. No. He held her gaze. Yes. No civilization ends completely, sir. Governments collapse. Fleets break. Worlds secede. Supply lines fail. But total. This one does. She took a step toward him without seeming to mean to. How? Not here. Her jaw tightened. We are alone. We are in an Accord diplomatic station built by species who believe privacy is an engineering challenge, not a right. That answer landed too. She glanced, instinctively now, at the seam lines in the walls, the decorative insets, the polished floor where sound might travel strangely if it needed to. Then she looked back at the timer, and the whole corridor changed around her. Not physically. Conceptually. Now every surface had listeners behind it. Now every second mattered. Now the line he had dropped in the chamber was no longer rhetorical violence. It was a delayed detonation. 6 hours 45 minutes and 2 seconds. 6 hours 45 minutes and 1 second. 6 hours and 45 minutes. Lisa straightened. All right, she said. Then give me what you can. Elias slid the timer back into his coat, but he did not resume walking yet. What I can give you, he said, is this: 6 hours from now, every Kharis fleet will be directionless. Every central command node will go silent. Every major Dominion world will lose the one thing that makes the Dominion what it is. Lisa did not interrupt. Good. He continued. It will not burn. There will be no grand battle, no bombardment, no image for the Accord to use in commemorative speeches 10 years from now. There will simply be a moment when all of them discover that what held them together is gone. Her voice, when it came, was quieter. You make that sound almost merciful. It is more merciful than war. But it's still war. Yes. He appreciated that she made him say it. Outside the narrow end window, a cargo line of shuttle lights moved across the starfield in perfect silence, one after another, toward some dock ring far below the diplomatic wing. Ordinary traffic. Ordinary people. Ordinary motion continuing while history prepared to come apart somewhere else. Lisa turned slightly toward that view, then back to him. And Meridian Vale? There it was. Not the operation. Not the politics. The dead. Elias answered without delay. Meridian Vale is why we stopped waiting. She studied him for one long second. Then another. And in those 2 seconds he could see her align the timeline on her own. The attack 3 weeks ago, the old contingency, the activation window, the confidence in the chamber. Not invention. Not improvisation. Decision. The kind made only after something patient had already been built. Her next question was the right one. How long, she asked, has this existed? Elias looked past her, not at the corridor but at a place 47 years and several governments away. Long enough, he said, that some of the people who designed it are dead. She absorbed that. And because she was who she was, she did not ask the moral question first. She asked the operational one. Are we safe? A better officer would have lied. A better diplomat certainly would have. Elias had spent too many years around both. Safer aboard the ship than here, he said. That is not the same answer. It is the only honest one. For the first time since leaving the chamber, something like emotion crossed her face. Not fear. Not exactly. The look of a person realizing that the world has already changed, but the people inside it have not yet caught up enough to behave accordingly. She gave one sharp nod. Then we should move. Yes. He stepped toward the secured lift at the end of the hall. The doors sensed approach and opened with silent precision. As they entered, Lisa spoke once more, eyes fixed ahead. When we're aboard, she said, I want the beginning. You'll have it. The real beginning. Yes. The doors slid shut. The lift began to descend. For a few seconds, the only sound was the low magnetic hum of controlled motion and the nearly inaudible breath of two people who understood very different amounts of the same disaster. Then Lisa asked the one question he had known would come eventually. Sir. He did not look at her. Yes. When you smiled in there. She stopped. Started again. When they asked us to end the Dominion. When you said it was already done. Now he did look at her. Not because the question surprised him. Because it mattered. Why were you smiling? For a moment the lift's dark walls reflected them both, her rigid in thought, him older than he felt, both descending toward a ship already carrying knowledge heavy enough to bend the next century around it. At last Elias answered. Because, he said, for 47 years someone on our side has been building the sentence I gave them tonight. The lift continued downward. He looked at the closed doors as if he could already see beyond them, to docking lights, secured hatches, command decks, and the long final hours of a plan no one in the chamber had been old enough to witness from its beginning. And because, he said more quietly, I wanted to make sure that when I finally said it, it was true. The shuttle detached from the Concordium station with a soft metallic shudder and slid into open dark. For a few seconds neither of them spoke. The cabin was small, more functional than diplomatic. 2 crash seats facing each other, 1 narrow command console, 1 overhead strip of muted light, and a broad side panel of reinforced glass showing the station receding behind them. The Concordium wheel turned slowly in the black, all polished authority and old agreements, still carrying 12 governments that believed they were in the middle of a crisis. They were not. They were in the delay between one. Commander Lisa Varen sat opposite Elias with her hands loosely clasped, the posture of someone forcing the body into stillness while the mind ran hard enough to leave heat marks. She had not asked another question during launch. Good. He preferred officers who could hold silence until it was useful. Now, as the station shrank into distance, she finally said, You told me on board. I did. We are on board. He gave a small nod. Outside the side panel, their escort beacons blinked once and fell into formation. 2 Accord-licensed cutters and 1 human corvette running dark enough to pass as administrative security if anyone glanced too quickly. Farther ahead, still just a blade-shaped glimmer against the stars, hung the Resolute, flag command, black-hulled, patient. Lisa followed his eyes toward it. Before you tell me how, she said, tell me why. Elias leaned back in his seat. For the first time since leaving the chamber, some of the performance drained out of him. Not the calm. That was real. But the outer structure of command, the voice chosen for councils, the posture sharpened for diplomats, the exact degree of distance needed to stand in front of other species while carrying human grief like a sealed weapon. What exactly, he asked, do you mean by why? I mean this. Lisa held his gaze. Every species in that chamber expected us to answer Meridian Vale with fleet action, public retaliation, burning worlds if necessary. You walked in with something colder, smaller on the surface, final underneath. That means the choice wasn't just operational. No, Elias thought. It never had been. She continued. So before you tell me what plan can end an empire in under 7 hours, tell me what kind of species decides that rage is not enough. That, he thought, was the correct question. And because she had reached it on her own, she had earned the truth beneath the truth. He looked once more through the side panel. The Concordium station was smaller now, reduced to geometry and reflected light. Distance improved its dignity. When the Accord first met us, he said, what did they call humanity? Lisa gave the answer instantly. Unstable. Short horizon. Aggression-prone. Adaptive but strategically immature. He almost smiled. Diplomatic version? The young predators. Closer. She waited. They looked at us, Elias said, and saw the obvious things first. The wars in our archive. The way our history is crowded with flags, trenches, extinctions, scorched cities, and men in uniform making speeches over graves. They assumed that was the core of us. And it isn't? It is, he said. Partly. But not in the way they think. He folded his hands loosely over one knee. Other species see human violence and imagine appetite. They think we strike because we are strong enough to enjoy it. Lisa's expression shifted by a fraction. But we learned violence when we were weak. That held her. Good. He went on. For most of our existence, we were soft animals on an inconvenient planet. No natural armor. No speed worth respecting. No poison. No claws. No teeth that meant anything to the things already waiting to eat us. We survived because we did something better than fight. He paused. Tell me. Lisa said nothing. He answered himself. We remembered. The shuttle hummed softly around them. We remembered where the cat waited in the grass. We remembered which fruit made people sick in winter. We remembered which river flooded and which one only pretended to. We remembered who betrayed us, which road froze first, what sound the ice made before it broke, what season the herds returned, what shape the trap needed to be, and how long it was worth waiting inside one. He looked at her directly now. Strength matters in the moment. Memory matters after the moment. A species built on memory doesn't just survive the strike. It survives long enough to answer it. Lisa exhaled slowly. And patience. Yes. Not anger. Anger starts things. Patience finishes them. That line settled between them, and Elias knew it would stay. Good officers carried certain sentences for years because they were small enough to use and heavy enough not to forget. She leaned back slightly, studying him. So that's what they all miss. Most of them. The Accord thinks humans are dangerous because we're emotional. The Accord thinks humans are dangerous because it mistakes heat for force. He looked toward the stars again. What actually makes us dangerous is that we can stay cold for a very long time without losing interest. Lisa turned that over. He could almost hear the machinery of her mind aligning old assumptions with new architecture. Meridian Veil, she said at last, didn't create this plan. No. It activated it. Yes. That answer tightened the air again. There it was, the shape of the thing beneath the chamber scene. Not an improvisation. Not revenge in the hot sense. Not a war council scrambling after tragedy. Preparation. Old, quiet, disciplined preparation. Lisa's next question came more carefully. How old? Elias looked at the sealed compartment below the command console, then away again. 47 years, 7 months, and 19 days from concept authorization. She stared. That predates your commission. It predates several governments. And no one outside the chain ever found it. No one outside the chain was meant to. She was silent long enough now that he let it remain. Some truths needed room after entering the body. At last she asked, Do you know what the chamber will conclude? That humanity lies. That humanity hides. That humanity builds apocalypse in boxes and waits for permission to become frightening. All true, Elias said. From a certain angle. She did not like that answer. Good. She should not. The shuttle banked slightly as it aligned approach with the Resolute. The ship was larger now, no longer a distant blade but a dark geometry of layered armor and restrained light, all sharp edges and disciplined silence. No parade illumination. No unnecessary display. The sort of vessel that did not introduce itself because it expected you had already read the file. Lisa followed his gaze toward it. And from the correct angle? Elias was quiet for a few seconds before answering. From the correct angle, he said, humanity is the species that prepares for the worst thing in the room while everyone else is still debating whether it would be rude to mention it. That drew the faintest huff of air from her. Not amusement, not quite. Recognition, maybe. You should put that on a recruiting poster. We'd lose the careful ones. That's probably true. The exchange passed quickly. The gravity of the room returned the moment after it left. Lisa shifted forward, elbows on knees now. So let me say it back. Tell me where I'm wrong. Her tone had become operational again. The Dominion struck Meridian Vale. The Accord assumed human retaliation would look like conventional war, because that's what most species recognize as meaningful force. But humanity's oldest strategic instinct is not direct retaliation. It's long pursuit, stored memory, and tailored tools. Therefore, what we're about to do to the Dominion is not an emotional response. It's the unveiling of a response designed decades ago by a species that never expected strength to save it quickly. Elias nodded once. That's close enough to dangerous. She accepted that. Then. And the reason you smiled in the chamber? He looked at her. Yes. You weren't smiling because the Dominion was dying. No. That would have been simpler. He answered honestly. I was smiling because for the first time in my life, the galaxy asked humanity to be exactly what it had spent decades hoping we would never need to become. Lisa held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked down at her own hands and said, quietly, "That's not better." "No. But it is cleaner." "Cleaner than fleets," Elias said. "Cleaner than occupation. Cleaner than setting 10,000 years on fire because no one had the imagination to do something smaller and more final." She said nothing to that. Not agreement. Not objection. Only thought. The shuttle lights dimmed briefly as docking handshake protocols initiated with the Resolute. A soft tone sounded above the hatch. 3 minutes to seal. Lisa sat back again and let out one slow breath. "All right," she said. "Then tell me what kind of species the Dominion really is." That was it. The bridge between principle and mechanism. Between the human philosophy that had made this plan possible and the enemy structure that had made it necessary. Elias reached into his coat, withdrew the timer again, and placed it flat between them on the narrow fold-out table. 6 hours, 18 minutes, and 9 seconds. The numbers rolled down in silence. "When I tell you the next part," he said, "you're going to think at first that the Dominion's greatest strength is exactly why no one believed they could ever be ended." Lisa looked from the timer to his face. "And then," Elias said, "you're going to understand why humanity saw the same fact and spent 47 years building a way to turn it inside out." The shuttle locked into the Resolute with a deep mechanical thud that ran through the hull like a final punctuation mark. Neither of them moved at once. The timer still sat between them on the fold-out table, its digits continuing their quiet descent through the last 6 hours of an old decision. 6 hours, 17 minutes, and 41 seconds. 6 hours, 17 minutes, and 40 seconds. 6 hours, 17 minutes, and 39 seconds. Lisa stared at it for 1 second longer, then lifted her eyes. "The Dominion," she said, "isn't just a state. No. It's a biological system." "Closer." Elias rose as the docking clamps finished sealing, but he did not yet reach for the hatch release. Instead, he turned sideways in the narrow cabin and rested one hand lightly against the command console, looking not at her now, but at the dark pane where the stars had vanished beneath the Resolute's hull. "How much did your clearance briefings include?" he asked. "Standard Accord-level assessments," Lisa said as she stood. "Distributed central governance. Coordinated fleet doctrine. Shared command architecture. Exceptional strategic cohesion. Very little verified on their internal social structure. That last part was the problem. He keyed the inner lock. The cabin hissed softly as atmosphere equalized with the ship. The Accord saw what the Dominion did in public. Fleets that maneuvered as if one mind directed all of them. Colonies that converted in perfect sequence. Territorial withdrawals without confusion, offensives without delay, command structures with no visible friction. He looked back at her. And like every old power that has been frightened long enough by the same thing, they made a mistake. They started describing the Dominion with myth instead of analysis. Lisa nodded once. Unstoppable. Unreachable. Unified. Yes. The hatch folded upward. Beyond it stood a short docking bridge lit in restrained white, with 2 Marine officers at attention and a security field humming faint blue across the far threshold. Elias stepped out first. Lisa followed. The air aboard the Resolute always smelled faintly of filtered metal, cold fabric, and machine heat. Human warships carried their own kind of honesty. Nothing was decorative without having first survived an argument. The Marines saluted. Elias returned it without slowing. "Command route," he said. "Yes, sir." They passed through the blue security field and into the inner passageway. It was narrower than the Accord station corridors, lower lit, more efficient. Every panel line had a purpose. Every hatch had mass to it. Every person they passed seemed already to know whether to step aside, continue, or wait. That, too, was part of what other species sensed when they boarded human vessels and rarely knew how to name. Not aggression. Readiness. Lisa kept pace beside him. So what did the Accord miss? They believed the Dominion's cohesion came from culture. And it doesn't. It does, Elias said, but not first. They turned down a secure access spine that curved toward command levels. Here the traffic thinned. Only ranking officers used this route, and only when timing mattered enough that no one wanted accidental conversation. Elias continued. The first teams who studied captured Dominion tissue thought they were looking at a standard case of distributed neural redundancy. Then they thought it was biochemical signal harmonics. Then an exotic fungal symbiote. Then a form of inherited memory lattice. And all of them were wrong? All of them were partially right, he said. Which made the truth harder to see. Lisa glanced at him. That sounds familiar. He gave her the smallest possible nod. 47 years earlier, 3 human xenobiologists and 1 military systems theorist had sat in a sealed room on Luna and nearly been laughed out of relevance for presenting the first coherent model of what the Dominion actually was. He had read the meeting transcript once, years ago. The disbelief in it had not aged well. They reached a sealed lift and entered together. The doors closed. Only then did Elias speak again. The Dominion presents as an empire, he said. Flags, fleets, colonies, hierarchies, war doctrine. That's the surface. Underneath, each individual Charis is born with a mycelial cognitive scaffold. Lisa's eyes sharpened immediately. Biological. Yes. Natural. Long enough ago that the distinction no longer matters. The lift began to rise. Elias watched the level indicators change one by one. The scaffold is not mind control. That's the first place most species go wrong. No one is giving orders into a puppet body. Each Charis is capable of perception, action, problem solving. They can speak as individuals. They can negotiate. They can even appear solitary for long periods. But they aren't. No. He looked at her. They are nodes. That landed. Good. Lisa didn't interrupt. They do not think like a hive in the childish sense, Elias said. There is no queen. No throne brain. No single central body you can kill and call it victory. What exists instead is a species-wide cognitive field generated through continuous fungal exchange. Memory, purpose, strategic weighting, social identity, long-range consensus framing, all of it exists partly inside the individual and partly in the network between them. Lisa was silent for 3 full seconds. Then, so every Caris is themselves. And also more than themselves. And the Dominion's empire only functions because that network never stops. Yes. The lift doors opened onto command level. They stepped out into a broader central corridor where the hum of ship systems deepened and the first signs of alert status became visible. Fast-moving data couriers, screens turned toward secured channels, red-amber status bands along the wall edges, bridge support personnel speaking in clipped low voices that meant no one wanted to be the loudest person near history. Captain Saran Holt emerged from a side hatch 20 meters ahead, saw Elias, and altered course immediately. She was 48, broad-shouldered, weather-dark from years under artificial and natural stars alike, with short iron-gray hair and the unmistakable posture of a person who trusted almost nothing except procedure and the handful of humans who had repeatedly survived breaking it for good reasons. "Commander," she said when she reached them. "Bridge is sealed and ready. Observation channels are live across all major Dominion sectors. No anomalies yet. There will be." "Yes, sir." Her gaze shifted to Lisa for half a second, then back. A question without words. "She's cleared in," Elias said. Holt nodded once. No surprise. No visible concern. She simply folded the fact into the next minute and moved on. "I'll want you on central display once you're ready." "We're coming." She turned and was gone again, already speaking into a wrist unit before the hatch swallowed her. Lisa exhaled quietly. She didn't even blink. Captain Holt blinks only for weather and mutiny. "I'm reassured." They resumed walking toward the bridge. Lisa came back to it immediately. "If the Dominion's real center is species-wide rather than territorial," she said, "then all the Accord's models were built against the wrong target." Yes. All this time they were trying to solve geography. Yes. When the actual vulnerability was cognition. Exactly. That answer changed her stride by half a fraction. Not slower. More deliberate. The kind of physical adjustment that came when a mind crossed from understanding a situation to understanding why the whole galaxy had misunderstood it first. "No wonder conventional war never made sense," she said. "It made tactical sense," Elias replied. "It just never made final sense. You could burn fleets, sever lanes, starve colonies, even crack worlds. The network would absorb the loss, redistribute function, preserve identity, continue. Every wound looked mortal from the outside because every species in the Accord thinks in bodies, borders, and hardware. The Dominion's true continuity was elsewhere. And once you knew that, Elias said, the problem changed shape. They passed the final security arch before the bridge corridor. This one scan bone, retinal, thermal patterning, and a rotating molecular key invisible to anyone without command-level authorization. The system flashed green and cleared them through. Lisa's voice lowered. "So that was the revelation." "Not yet." She looked at him. "That's not enough?" It was enough to explain why the Accord couldn't kill them. They reached the last hatch before the bridge. Elias stopped there. Not because he needed the pause. Because she did. He turned to face her fully. The revelation, he said, was not that the Dominion had a networked mind. Lisa held still. It was what sat at the center of that network. The ship seemed quieter here, though that was impossible. Really, it was only that every important sound now came from inside the conversation instead of the bulkheads. "What sat at the center?" she asked. Elias answered with the precision of a sentence sharpened across decades. "A single shared certainty." Her brow tightened. "That they would win?" "No." "That they were chosen?" "No." He let the next words come without decoration. "That they were not alone." Lisa stared. The bridge hatch behind him remained sealed. The command deck beyond it waited full of officers, signals, and the first edge of the event now moving toward them from 37 days in the past. But for one suspended moment, only the theory mattered. "The scaffold doesn't just exchange information," Elias said. "It continuously reaffirms species presence. Every Caris lives embedded in a field of others. Their identity is relational before it is individual. They do not merely communicate with the network. They are psychologically built inside the knowledge that the network exists. Lisa understood enough now that the next step hurt before she reached it. If that certainty breaks, the whole structure loses coherence. She looked away from him for the first time since they'd boarded. Not in rejection. In calculation. Wait, she said slowly. No. If that's true, then the central weakness was never biological destruction. It was epistemic destabilization. He said nothing, because she had it. She looked back, eyes widened by the kind of comprehension that feels almost like fear if it arrives too cleanly. You didn't build a weapon to kill the Karis. No. You built a weapon to make them believe they were already gone. The bridge hatch remained closed. The whole ship seemed to hold one shared breath with her. At last Elias nodded. Yes. For a moment Lisa said nothing at all. Then, very softly, My God. No, Elias said. Just patience. The phrase did not comfort either of them. Good. It shouldn't. Lisa pressed one hand briefly against the cold wall beside the hatch, grounding herself not emotionally but structurally, as if the body needed one contact point with engineered certainty before she stepped the rest of the way into the idea. That's not a weapon, she said. It is to them. It's... She stopped, searched, failed, started again. It's not destruction. It's removal of a foundational fact. Yes. And if the network has been carrying identity, memory weighting, purpose structures, then the collapse will look quiet from the outside, Elias said. And absolute from within. She closed her eyes once. Not dramatically. A single measured reset. When she opened them again, she was back. Operational. Thinking. Who saw it first? There. The right next question. Elias laid one hand on the bridge hatch release and answered without looking away. 47 years ago, a human biologist read a Dominion tissue report and realized the galaxy had been describing the wrong war for 200 years. Lisa drew in one slow breath. And the moment she saw that, Elias thumbed the release. The hatch mechanisms began to cycle. The countdown, he said, started a very long time before Meridian Veil. The bridge of the Resolute was lit for war, but not the kind older species would recognize. No red alarms. No shouted targeting solutions. No tactical overlays crowded with fleet vectors and kill probabilities. Instead, the great forward display showed the Kari's territories as a patient spread of light across black. Hundreds of markers, every major node and satellite world tagged in layers of military, scientific, and observational metadata. At first glance it looked almost peaceful. Quiet lights in ordered arrangements. A civilization going about its ordinary business. That was the lie scale always told. Captain Saran Holt stood at the center command ring with her hands clasped behind her back while the bridge staff worked in low-voiced concentration around her. Sensor chiefs monitored Dominion comm bands. Tactical observers tracked fleet behavior. Signal analysts watched for variance patterns they had trained half their careers to recognize. No one here looked excited. No one looked triumphant. The crew of the Resolute had been briefed enough to know they were not about to witness a battle. They were about to witness a conclusion. Lisa stepped through the hatch beside Elias and slowed just enough to take in the room. He could almost see the moment her military instincts reclassified what kind of event this was. A normal engagement had noise. This had preparation. A normal strike front-loaded energy. This concentrated it into attention. Captain Holt turned. Commander. Central channels are clean. No behavioral anomalies yet beyond standard post-raid Dominion traffic. He continued. Every Kari's consciousness receives, reinforces, and depends upon a repeating foundational assumption. There are others like me. I am inside them. They are inside me. The whole is real. It's not just communication. It's orientation. It's what allows memory, duty, and purpose to organize coherently at scale. Lisa looked from the pattern to the map and back again. And the weapon attacks the assumption. Yes. How? Elias lowered his voice slightly, though every person on the bridge already knew enough to understand what kind of conversation this was. Not by contradiction. That was the early failure. If you send a message that says the hive is false, the network rejects it as noise. Too direct. Too alien. Too external. He keyed forward through 3 old experiment states, sterile simulations, dead fungal matrices, partial resonance graphs. We spent 11 years discovering what didn't work. Direct negation. Forced memory corruption. Induced pain association. Coordinated signal overload. All catastrophic, all detectable, all useless. And then Solberg realized we were treating the network like a machine instead of a language. Lisa was fully still now. Good. That meant she was listening at the right time to first fracture? Elias glanced at his wrist. 5 hours 58 minutes and 12 seconds. Soon. Holt nodded once, accepting the answer the way officers on high-clearance projects learn to accept the edge of truth without leaning over it. Her eyes flicked to Lisa. Commander Wren. Captain. You're on secondary observation. Use my station if you need direct signal breakdown. Understood. Holt returned to the bridge. No more words. No ceremonial transfer. The room had already absorbed Lisa's presence and moved on. Elias led her to a side command console facing the main display. It was positioned just far enough from the center ring to allow private conversation without pretending privacy truly existed aboard a live flagship. Lisa looked up at the map. Hive nodes. Command population concentrations, fungal exchange infrastructure, fleet lattice hubs, and inferred high-density cognitive corridors. Inferred. We never had complete physical access. But enough. He nodded. Enough had always been the human threshold for beginning. Not certainty. Not safety. Enough. Lisa rested both hands lightly on the console edge. Tell me the weapon. There it was. The step beyond the enemy's weakness. The thing itself. Elias did not answer immediately. Instead he keyed the console once and brought up a closed file header on the side display. No specifics. No formulas. Only a project designation. Project stillness/classification absolute. Beneath it, a date. 47 years ago. Lisa read it, then looked back at him. She named it that? The third lead did. Why? Because the first name was too honest. That nearly drew a reaction from her. Nearly. The side display shifted at his command, now showing a simplified biological animation, a branching fungal scaffold threading through neural tissue, not crudely, not parasitically, but as if the species had grown around the network so long ago that neither could now be described separately. The Accord believed the Karis were invulnerable because distributed minds are hard to kill, Elias said. A dead soldier means nothing to a species whose strategic cognition is shared across worlds. Lisa nodded once. So you looked for what the network required to remain itself? Yes. He changed the display again. Now it showed not tissue, but pattern, a repeating cascade of symbolic nodes pulsing in relation to one another. Dr. Nareen Solberg was the first to state it correctly in the archive language we still use. The Karis network is not held together by information exchange alone. Information can fragment and recover. It's held together by a recursive identity affirmation. Lisa watched the pattern. Explain in ordinary words. The network is constantly telling itself that the network exists. That landed. Epth. The Karis scaffold doesn't merely transmit cognition, Elias said. It interprets selfhood through recurring biological statements. Molecular rhythm. Fungal exchange timing. Neurochemical reinforcement loops. At scale, identity is maintained as a continuously repeated phrase in tissue form. Her eyes sharpened. A phrase. A living one. And you rewrote it. We built a structure, he said, that enters the exchange as if it belongs there and slowly changes one foundational line. He let that sit before giving her the clean version. The weapon teaches the Karis network a single false certainty, that no other Karis remain. The bridge around them kept working, but the sentence altered the air anyway. Lisa looked back to the map. Not with awe. With the sober recognition of mechanism understood too clearly. That's not a disease. No. It's not a signal attack. No. It's not even really information warfare. Elias gave the smallest tilt of his head. It is if identity is information. For the first time since boarding, Lisa let one hand leave the console and press lightly against her own mouth, not in shock but in involuntary respect for the scale of the idea. Then she forced the hand back down. How was it carried? That comes next. Not yet, she said. I'm still on the weapon. Fair enough. He continued. The project's internal term was language weapon, but that was mostly for the politicians. It helped them think of it as abstract. Cleaner that way. What it actually is a molecular grammar engineered to be mistaken for endogenous scaffold affirmation. Lisa stared. You made tissue lie. Yes. The side display shifted again, this time showing a simplified progression. Entry, acceptance, distribution, consensus drift, identity fracture. The weapon enters through ordinary biological contact, Elias said. Once inside the fungal exchange, it does nothing dramatic. No immediate disruption. No pain. No alarms. It is designed to be interpreted as native reinforcement. And then it repeats the lie. Very slowly. How slowly? 37 days from full adoption to terminal cognitive separation. She looked at him sharply. That long? It had to be. Anything faster would have been noticed as injury. The network would quarantine the anomaly. He closed the animation. The genius of it, he said, is that it doesn't attack the Dominion as an enemy. It joins the Dominion as a trusted internal voice. Lisa said nothing. That was wise. Some truths should stand without interruption. At the center ring, a comms officer raised a hand toward Captain Holt. Minor variance on outer trade relays, ma'am. Still within normal post-raid pattern. Mark and continue, Holt said. The bridge did not tense. Not yet. Elias checked the timer again. 5 hours 51 minutes and 44 seconds. Lisa followed the movement. So for 37 days, she said, the Dominion has been carrying its own ending inside its ordinary cognition. Yes. And no one noticed. No one could, Elias said. That was part of the design. The network does not experience the weapon as attack. It experiences it as deepening truth. A faint chill passed through her expression then. Deepening. Yes. The isolation belief isn't introduced as panic. It accumulates as certainty. By the time the first Kharis feels the absence, the network has already interpreted absence as reality. She looked at the broad map again, at the hundreds of still red Dominion markers. All of them. All of them. And what happens at 0, exactly? Elias answered with the clarity of a sentence rehearsed too many times in private. At 0, the recursive affirmation collapses. Every Kharis consciousness loses the network as a lived fact. They do not die. They do not burn. They do not scream. They simply find themselves alone in a way their species has never been built to survive. Lisa's eyes moved slowly across the display. A civilization erased by solitude. The words were not rhetorical. Just accurate. He nodded once. That is the weapon. For several seconds neither spoke. On the bridge, officers continued their work under quiet lights, every screen waiting for the first visible fracture. Somewhere beneath the deck, engines held steady. Somewhere far away, on worlds marked in red across the display, Kharis commanders issued routine orders and expected routine obedience from a civilization whose ending was already threaded through the spaces between its thoughts. At last Lisa said, "You said the first name was too honest." Elias looked at her. What was it? He thought of the oldest archive proposal, of a young scientist writing with too much precision and not enough political instinct, before committees learned to rename hard things into language governments could sign. Then he told her. Project Loneliness. Lisa closed her eyes once. When she opened them again, the map was still red. The bridge was still quiet. The timer was still counting down. And somewhere inside her, the shape of the war had changed permanently. Whoever carried this into the Dominion, she said, didn't carry a weapon. Elias looked at the stars on the forward display and thought of a sealed envelope still in his inner pocket. No, he said softly. They carried the sentence. For a long moment after he said it, Lisa Wren did not move. The bridge of the Resolute continued around them in its measured quiet, status lights pulsing, officers murmuring into headsets, the great red constellation of Dominion territory still steady across the forward display, but between them the atmosphere had changed. Not because the weapon had become more terrible. Because it had become more human. A sentence carried by a person. Not launched. Not fired. Not dropped from orbit. Carried. Lisa looked at Elias with a different kind of attention now. Less strategic. More dangerous. Who? Elias did not pretend not to understand the question. He looked down once at the timer on his wrist. 5 hours 49 minutes and 18 seconds. Then back at her. Her name was Ellen Ma. Lisa waited. The bridge around them seemed, for just a second, farther away. She was 31, Elias said. Born in the northern uplands of Old Finland. Civilian first. Research assistant by training. No military commission when we found her. No combat record. No history that would have made anyone in the Accord look twice if they'd seen her name on a passenger manifest. He paused. She was also dying. There it was. Lisa's expression changed, but only slightly. The kind of shift a disciplined officer allowed herself when the body recognized a shape the mind had already begun to fear. What illness? Neural lattice degeneration. Rare. Fast once it crossed the threshold. By the time she entered the project, no available treatment could stop it. Estimated life expectancy under a year. Lisa lowered her eyes to the dark edge of the console. And we asked her anyway. No. She looked up. We did not ask, Elias said. That matters. At the center command ring, Captain Holt received a low-voiced update from Signals and dismissed it with a nod. Still nothing visible to anyone not already inside the secret. The universe had not changed yet. Only its direction had. Lisa said, then how? Elias drew a slow breath. He had told this story only twice before. Once to the oversight circle on Earth when final authorization was signed. Once alone into a secured archival recorder under seal, because if the operation succeeded, history would need one version not filtered through politics. Now this was the third time. And in some ways the hardest. Because Lisa was not a politician or a historian. She was the kind of person who measured truth by whether it could still bear weight after you placed a human life on top of it. 8 months ago, Elias said, I flew to a facility that does not officially exist on any Earth registry. Desert exterior, buried core, no active identifiers, false weather station profile from orbit. That was where the project had been refined for the last 13 years. Lisa did not interrupt. Good. He continued. By then, Project Stillness was theoretically complete. The language was stable. Delivery through tissue contact had been proven across dead scaffold cultures and live fungal matrices. The final problem was transit. The carrier. Yes. He looked out toward the forward display, but he was no longer seeing the Dominion map. He was seeing a white-walled room lit with evening sun, a ceramic cup on a table, dust moving in warm slanted light, and a woman turning a page in a book as if nothing in the world had become strange. When Dr. Solberg's third-generation model finally worked, Elias said, the medical branch began screening for volunteers with a specific profile. Someone terminal, because the integration process would accelerate existing breakdown. Someone psychologically stable. Someone intelligent enough to understand the moral consequences without needing them softened. Someone capable of long-duration composure under captivity. Lisa's voice was quiet. Ellen. Yes. A communications officer on the far side of the bridge lifted one hand toward Captain Holt again, then lowered it when the variance resolved back into baseline traffic. Still too early. Elias went on. She had lost her father 4 years earlier. Her mother ran a bakery in a small town where most people still knew each other by door sound and winter habits. Her younger brother was training to teach primary students. She had wanted, before the diagnosis, to work in botanical systems research. Quiet life. Useful work. Nothing in her file suggested a person who should end an empire. Lisa gave one small nod. That's usually how history hides them. Yes. He folded his hands loosely behind his back, the posture helping keep his voice level. When I arrived, Dr. Kettering met me in the lower corridor outside her room. He'd been with the project nearly 20 years. Excellent scientist. Nervous man. The kind who looked perpetually like he'd just remembered a mistake in an equation from 6 months earlier. Lisa almost smiled. Almost. He warned me, Elias said, that she was not what I expected. And he was right. He let the memory come fully now. The room was simple. 1 bed, 1 chair, a narrow window looking out over the desert at sunset. A kettle still steaming on a side table. She was seated by the window reading when I entered. He could see it clearly enough that for a second the bridge dimmed around the memory. She looked up, he said, closed the book and said, "Commander Varen, please sit. The tea is still warm." Lisa watched him closely. "You remember the exact words?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because nothing in that room behaved the way it had any right to. That drew the smallest crease at the edge of her brow." He explained. "I had spent most of my career in rooms where bad news made people smaller, tighter, reduced. They gripped things too hard or not at all. They rehearsed bravery if they couldn't feel it. She did none of that. She was not pretending to be fearless. She was simply beyond the point of wasting energy on theater." A pause. She had already accepted the terms of her own life ending. That made the rest of us in the room feel unprepared. Lisa said nothing. On the main display, the Dominion still burned red and intact. Elias continued. She poured tea for both of us. Hands perfectly steady. Then she asked me the question no one on the Oversight Council had asked in 30 years. Lisa did not need to guess. Was it right? He looked at her. Yes. The answer sat between them. Of course it had been that question. Of course no one in policy had asked it properly until the person whose body would carry the plan forced the room to stop abstracting. "What did you tell her?" Lisa asked. "The truth." He was grateful, even now, that this much remained true. "I told her I did not know whether the plan was right. Only that it was less wrong than war." He spoke the next part more quietly. "I told her billions would die if we met the Dominion with fleets. That whatever we did, if Meridian Veil ever came or something like it, the galaxy would burn for generations unless we had another answer. I told her this plan would leave worlds standing, children alive, infrastructure unbombed. It would end the threat without teaching 10,000 more species that the only universal language was fire." Lisa's gaze never left his face. "And she believed you?" "No," Elias said. "She trusted that I wasn't lying." That distinction mattered enough that he gave it room. "She said if I had answered with certainty, if I had called the plan good, clean, unquestionably just, she would have stopped trusting me immediately. She said anyone who is fully comfortable with a thing like that is either a fool or a danger." Lisa let out one slow breath. "She sounds useful." "She was extraordinary." He looked down once at the timer. 5 hours 43 minutes and 2 seconds. Still time. Too little. Too much. "She talked to me for nearly 2 hours, Elias said. About her family. Her mother's bread. Her brother's students, though he didn't have any yet. The watch she wore that had belonged to her father. The kind of ordinary things people mention when they are not interested in being remembered only through their death." Lisa's expression softened by a fraction. "Did she seem afraid?" "Yes," Elias said immediately. "But not of the part everyone assumes." That caught her. "She was afraid," he said, of wasting the chance. There it was. The real center of Ellen Ma. Not courage as defiance. Courage as efficiency of purpose. She told me, Elias said, that most people with terminal time do not get to convert it into anything larger than waiting. She said she had been handed a bad ending either way. This version at least made the ending useful. Lisa looked away for a moment then, out toward the map, perhaps because looking directly at him while imagining the woman required more control than she wanted to spend. And the integration? 3 weeks. That brought her back. Only 3. The body accepted the molecular grammar faster than predicted. Her illness probably helped. The sentence sounded cruel even though it was clinically true. He hated it every time he said it. The language was woven through her epithelial layers, blood chemistry, fungal-compatible moisture carriers, bone marrow reservoirs. The goal was not to hide a bomb in her. There was no ignition point. No switch. We had to make her biologically legible to the Kari's scaffold. Lisa's mouth tightened slightly. So she became the message. Yes. He should have stopped there, perhaps. Let the sentence do its work. But Lisa had earned more than the neat version. She knew the process would shorten what remained of her life, he said. Knew it before she signed final consent. Knew captivity probability was near certain. Knew extraction probability was effectively 0. And still, yes. At the center ring, Captain Holt turned slightly toward them as if about to speak, then held the instinct back when she saw Elias still inside the conversation. Good officer. Lisa asked the hardest question without dramatics. Why her? Elias answered without flinching. Because she said yes after understanding everything. Not because she was expendable. Not because she was dying anyway. Not because the state had found a morally convenient body and dressed exploitation in noble language. Because she knew. And because she chose. That, more than any technical detail, was what made the operation survivable inside the human soul. Barely. But enough. He reached into his inner pocket slowly and withdrew a folded white envelope, edges softened by months of carrying. Lisa recognized immediately that this was not part of any standard briefing. She gave me a letter, Elias said. For her family. For her mother. To be delivered in person. Not by courier. Not through state channels. By me. The paper sat in his hand with more weight than some governments. I have carried it for 8 months, he said. I still haven't delivered it. Lisa looked at the envelope, then at him. Because you wanted to finish this first. Yes. Because if it failed, she would become rumor instead of answer. A small silence opened there. The bridge crew kept working. The timer kept moving. Somewhere beneath every red marker on the main screen, an entire civilization continued living inside assumptions already beginning to rot. Lisa said, very quietly, "What were her last instructions?" Elias turned the envelope once in his fingers. She asked me to tell her mother she hadn't been afraid at the end. He stopped. Then, because truth is rarely kind enough to stop where it should. She also asked me to tell the Currys she was sorry. Lisa looked at him as if to confirm she had heard correctly. For them. Yes. After Meridian Vale. Yes. That, he thought, was Ellen's true measure. Not that she could carry the sentence into the heart of an enemy species. Not even that she could walk knowingly toward death with steadier hands than most healthy officers carry into budget meetings. It was that she could still see tragedy on the far side of justice. Lisa lowered her eyes. For several seconds she said nothing at all. Then, she is the reason this story can still be told without filth. Elias nodded once. Yes. He returned the envelope to his coat. At the far end of the bridge, one of the signal officers suddenly straightened in her chair. Captain Holt was at her side in 2 steps. The room did not become louder. It became narrower. Holt looked toward Elias across the command ring. "Commander," she said, "outer Dominion lattice is beginning to show low-level pattern noise." There it was. Not the end. The beginning of the end becoming visible. Elias looked once at Lisa. The conversation had changed her. He could see it. Not broken her certainty, that was too crude. It had redistributed it. Made room in her for the fact that a civilization was about to die because one woman in a desert room had listened to an impossible plan, asked the only real question, and still said yes. He straightened. "Take us to the center display," he said. Captain Holt nodded. As Elias and Lisa stepped toward the command ring, he said one final thing without looking at her. "When the galaxy tells this story later, it will talk about councils and weapons and strategy." He glanced once at the red map blooming across the display. "It will be wrong." Lisa came to a stop beside him. "Yes," she said. "It usually is." The first signal distortion appeared at 5 hours 39 minutes and 12 seconds. Not on the main lattice. Not where the untrained eye would have noticed it. It came in as a hesitation pattern inside a low-priority Dominion trade relay 2 sectors spin ward of the Helion shear, an irregularity so small that, under any normal circumstances, it would have been logged, tagged, and forgotten by every government in the Accord before the next shift cycle began. On the bridge of the Resolute, it changed nothing visibly. No alarms. No spoken reaction from the crew. Only Captain Holt leaning one fraction closer to the display as the signal officer expanded the anomaly into a finer waveform. Commander Lisa Wren stood beside Elias at the central ring now, watching the first hairline fracture move across a civilization no one in the galaxy had ever believed could be made to hesitate. "Is that it?" she asked. "It's the edge of it," Elias said. The young signal officer at the station, Lieutenant Havel, swallowed once before speaking. "Dominion transmissions are still coherent, sir. But something's off in the interval spacing. They're waiting too long between relay confirmations." Captain Holt didn't take her eyes off the waveforms. "Is it technical?" "No, ma'am. Or if it is, it's happening across biologically mediated channels first. The machines are fine. The responses aren't." Elias nodded once. That was how it had always been projected to begin. Not with silence. With uncertainty. The first symptom of a mind losing the certainty that another mind was still there. On the main display, all Dominion markers still burned red. From the outside, nothing had changed. That was the nature of deep collapses. They began invisibly, below the level where empires knew to be afraid. Lisa looked at the faintly stuttering relay graph for another second before turning to Elias. "You said you'd tell me how she got in." He did not look away from the screen. "Now's the right time." Because the collapse beginning out there had started, in truth, months ago, in a place of market shadows and false names and the sort of human patience other species always mistook for passivity until it took shape around their throats. He spoke quietly, not because the room was unworthy of hearing, but because Ellen Marr's story had always refused to be told at the volume of strategy. "She disappeared from Earth under a dead identity," Elias said. "No military registry. No official movement. No biological record accessible through any public or Accord channel. For 17 days she became someone who had never existed until the paperwork said she had." Lisa said nothing. "Good." He continued. "The route in was never going to be direct. No human vessel could cross the Helion shear and live long enough to transmit anything useful. So we used the one thing the Dominion trusted more than diplomacy." "Trade," Lisa said. "Curiosity," Elias corrected. "But trade was how we fed it." The bridge around them remained quiet. The officers nearest enough to hear stayed disciplined enough not to react. On a ship like the Resolute, listening without interruption was its own form of respect. We'd spent 14 years building a black market legend around a broker named Thomas Vale. Smuggler profile. Mid-tier reliability. Rare specimens. Controlled greed. Every transaction verified just enough to build confidence and never enough to invite deep audit. Lisa's brow tightened slightly. "One of ours." "Yes." "For 14 years." "Yes." That answer landed the way all long preparations land on officers newly admitted into them, not as admiration, not yet, but as the dawning recognition that some operations begin before careers do and continue whether any one person is alive to see them end. Vale sold live biological curiosities along the outer criminal lanes, Elias said. Never anything politically sensitive. Never anything that would cause full accord crackdowns. Just enough weirdness to become valuable to Dominion acquisition circles without rising to the level of strategic concern. And when the time came, he offered them something they had wanted for years but could rarely secure intact. Lisa glanced toward him. A human. Yes. On the main display, one Dominion fleet marker twitched, held position for half a second too long, then resumed standard pathing. No one commented. But the bridge saw it. They all saw it. The beginning was spreading. Elias went on. Ellen was transported under heavy sedation inside a sealed specimen container designed to survive customs scans, invasive atmospheric shifts, and low-grade biometric probing without revealing anything meaningful. Vale's buyers inspected her twice before transfer. Did they suspect? No. Why not? Because the operation relied on a truth they considered beneath suspicion. Elias looked briefly at Lisa. They believed a dying human could only ever be cargo or victim. Never design. That answer sat coldly between them. He continued before she could ask the next question, because this part of the story had a structure that mattered. First the route. Then the world. Then the choice repeated every hour by a woman who had already said yes once, and was now required to keep saying it under circumstances no state should ask anyone to endure. From the trade lanes she was moved through 3 Dominion inspection nodes and 1 biological quarantine ring. 9 days total transit. Each stage increased exposure. Each stage increased scaffold contact. That was intentional. Lisa looked sharply at him. The weapon was already seeding. Yes. So the mission didn't begin on the homeworld. No. It began the first time a Dominion handler touched the container seals with unshielded hands. Captain Holt turned her head slightly. Commander. He glanced at her. Pattern noise now visible on 4 outer Dominion relays. He nodded once. Continue monitoring. Yes, sir. The red field on the main display remained mostly unchanged, but 4 points at the edges now pulsed with minute irregularity. Tiny enough to ignore if you didn't know what you were looking at. Human strategy, Elias thought, had always depended on other people not knowing what they were looking at until the pattern was too large to deny. Lisa's voice dropped lower. And when she reached the homeworld? For the first time since he'd begun the infiltration account, Elias had to pause. Not because he lacked words. Because he remembered too clearly the first time he'd seen the reconstructed interior imagery from the passive grain recorders stitched into Ellen's clothing seams, hair binding, and dental shell. The Kari's homeworld had not looked monstrous. That had made it worse. It was called Sar-Vane in their oldest recovered pre-expansion texts, he said at last. By the time we reached it, the Accord maps used the military designation Kari's Prime, as if naming a place after its threat profile made it easier to think about destroying. Lisa waited. The central hive spire rises 5 kilometers above the surface and extends at least 12 below. Living stone. Fungal architecture. Thermal breathing cavities. Half cathedral, half nervous system. He could see flashes of it now as he spoke. Dark iridescent surfaces glistening with internal moisture, vaulted chambers grown rather than built, walls faintly pulsing under indirect light with the biological rhythm of a civilization thinking through its own infrastructure. They took her there for study, Elias said. Not imprisonment at first. Examination. Human tissue was rare enough in inner Dominion space to be scientifically valuable. She was not treated kindly, exactly. But she was treated with attention. Lisa's mouth tightened. The Karis were polite to their specimens. Yes. And she knew they would be. Yes. On the bridge, another officer raised a hand. Captain, variance clusters now showing in 6 Fleet Command echoes. Nothing large enough for general sensors yet. Captain Holt folded that into the room with a nod. No drama. No wasted reaction. Elias continued. She had spent 2 years learning the Karis language before insertion. Not just syntax. Cadence. Pause structure. Politeness signals. She understood that if she behaved like prey, they would process her as prey. If she behaved like an object of study who accepted study, they would bring her closer to what mattered. Lisa turned her head slightly. She talked her way inward. She behaved her way inward, Elias said. That was harder. Because that was the true cruelty of the mission. Not simply carrying the sentence into the enemy's body. Not simply knowing you would die in the process. But inhabiting a role so convincingly that your destroyers invited you toward the heart of their world under the belief that you were safe to handle. She answered their questions, Elias said. Asked to see their structures. Showed controlled curiosity. Never too much. Never enough to trigger deeper suspicion. She let them explain themselves. People, species, always reveal more when they think they are teaching. Lisa nodded once, almost involuntarily. He went on. For 3 days they moved her through the upper hive spire. Study galleries. Biological exchange rooms. Archive chambers. Gardens where the fungal matrices were cultivated in warm, wet air and carried through the walls into every major cognitive artery of the species. Every place they brought her, the weapons spread. The bridge lights reflected coldly in the wide front glass. How? Lisa asked. Skin oils. Moisture. Shed cells. Breath residue. Surface contact. The weapon was designed not as an event, but as a grammar of contamination. Every ordinary trace of a living body became delivery. That answer made her go still again. Not shocked. Past shock now. This was the part where operational respect and moral discomfort learned to occupy the same space without canceling each other. She infected their sacred infrastructure by existing inside it, Lisa said. Yes. And they thanked her for cooperating. Yes. There it was, the full human cruelty of the thing, not in anger but in precision. The ability to let the enemy preserve its dignity while accepting a wound it had no language to even notice. Captain Holt's voice broke in, low and clean. Commander, we have our first outpost degradation. Remote watch post in the Marin Arc traffic still active, but relay hierarchy just failed and rebuilt in the wrong sequence. Elias looked up at the main display. One red marker at the outer edge had begun to pulse between standard combat red and a dimmer orange-white instability tone. The beginning of visible incoherence. Lisa saw it too. She's doing this now, she said, and immediately corrected herself. No. She already did it. Yes. The distinction mattered. Ellen Ma was not a present-tense weapon. She was the completed act still moving through time. Lisa turned back to him. What happened on the 4th day? The question hit exactly where it had to, because the first 3 days had been infiltration. The 4th was the point of no return. They began invasive study, Elias said. That was the clinical phrase. He hated it. He used it anyway because if he gave her the full sensory truth, it would become spectacle, and Ellen had earned better than becoming a vivid scene in someone else's memory. The Caris researchers were careful. Methodical. They sampled tissue, fluids, scaffold responses. Every sample entered the distributed fungal archive because that's how Caris science worked. No single lab. Shared understanding by design. Lisa understood immediately. The deeper they studied her, the more completely they distributed the weapon. Yes. The room seemed to contract around that answer. For a civilization built on collective certainty, curiosity had become the delivery arm of extinction. He looked down once at his hands, then back up. By the end of the 7th day, every major scaffold corridor on the homeworld carried the rewritten affirmation. From there it was only time and propagation. Lisa's voice was now almost careful enough to break. And Ellen? Elias held her gaze. She died on the 7th day. There was no softened version. No easing slope into the fact. On the main display, 3 more outer markers flickered into instability. Captain Holt's crew said nothing, but their focus had sharpened to a blade edge now. The event was no longer theoretical. Lisa asked the only remaining question quietly. Did we hear from her? Elias nodded once. 3 passive grain recorders survived long enough to send one final burst after activation threshold. Most of the data was structural. Audio fragments, hall acoustics, Kari's speech patterns, environmental verification. He stopped. And one final voice record. Lisa's eyes moved to the inside of his coat, though the envelope remained hidden there. What did she say? He answered from memory. Not because he had listened many times. Because one time had been enough to engrave the words where they would stay until his own death. She asked us to tell her mother she had not been afraid, he said. She asked us to tell her brother to be kind to his students. She asked us to tell the people of Meridian Vale that she remembered them at the end. Lisa closed her eyes once. Only once. When she opened them again, the first wave of red markers on the main display had begun to dim in visible sequence. Not dead. Disconnected. History moving from certainty into record. Then Elias gave her the last line, because this part mattered most. And then, he said, she asked us to tell the Karis that she was sorry. Lisa's breath caught so slightly most people would have missed it. Not Elias. Not now. Captain Holt looked over from the central station, seeing enough on their faces not to interrupt. The bridge held. The map shifted. The sentence spread. And for one suspended second, Ellen Ma stood more clearly in the room than any admiral or counselor ever would. Lisa stared at the dimming markers and said, almost to herself, she carried the end of a civilization into the darkest place in the galaxy, and still apologized. Yes. No explanation was large enough for that. None should try. At the main display, 2 more Karis outposts went from red to gray, the first visible deadening of a 1,000-year dominion. Captain Holt spoke without raising her voice. Full bridge attention. We are entering observable cascade. The officers tightened visibly now, not in panic but in witness. Lisa stood beside Elias, straight-backed, eyes on the falling lights. For several seconds she said nothing. Then, when history tells this, she said, it's going to talk about contingency doctrine and xenobiology and state response. It will. And all of that will be too small. Elias looked at the first wave of fading red and thought of bread, a desert sunset, and a woman who had refused to let anyone call an impossible thing clean. Yes, he said. It will. The first real silence did not come from the bridge. It came from the Karis. At 5 hours 12 minutes and 44 seconds, 3 outer relay worlds went gray together. Not red to black with the violence of destruction. Not the hot deadness of bombardment or reactor loss. Their signals simply lost structure all at once, as if a sentence mid-spoken had forgotten what language it belonged to. On the main display of the Resolute, the change was almost modest. 3 small lights at the far edge of a massive Dominion map dimmed from operational red to inert gray. If you did not know what you were looking at, you might have missed it. No one on the bridge missed it. Lieutenant Hovell's hands hovered over her console. Confirmed total relay collapse on Marin Arc Watchpost, Sable Reach Station, and the Halden Spur Reserve Lattice. No distress calls. No tactical override. They just stopped. Captain Holt did not move for a full second. Then, record all transitions. Timestamp against scaffold variance. Yes, ma'am. Around the bridge, the crew remained disciplined, but the room had changed. Not louder. Tighter. The kind of tension that only comes when a theory leaves paper and begins rewriting reality in front of witnesses. Lisa Wren stood beside Elias at the command ring, eyes fixed on the gray markers. That's too far apart, she said. No normal collapse would hit those positions together. No, Elias said. But this one isn't traveling by routes. It's traveling by belonging. She looked at him once, then back to the screen. The first signal analysis overlays began stacking across the main display in translucent bands. Relay drift, command latency, identity handshake failures, broken lattice confirmations. The data came faster now, no longer a few anomalies at the edges but clusters. Whole regions of the Karis communications architecture were starting to lose the certainty that the next answer would arrive. Captain Holt's second signal officer turned sharply in his station. "Ma'am, fleet traffic in the Vane corridor is repeating command packets. Same directive issued 4 times from 3 different carriers. Formation hasn't updated in 90 seconds. Holt said, "Project." The screen split. On one side, the broad Dominion map remained. On the other, a Karis battle group appeared in tactical render, 13 vessels in standard coordinated spear formation drifting through deep black, still beautiful in the cold geometric way military systems always are from a distance. Then the first ship broke rank. Not violently. Not as rebellion. It simply drifted half a degree off vector and did not correct. A second ship slowed. A third issued a burst of signal traffic no one answered. Lieutenant Havel's translation software turned the command exchange into partial text. Confirm heading. Confirm heading. Confirm heading. Why no return? Confirm presence. No one on the bridge spoke. The ships on the display continued gliding forward under dead momentum, all of them waiting for a consensus that no longer existed. Lisa said quietly, "It's beginning to feel it." Elias nodded. Not feel. Notice. That was the horror of the weapon. It did not create pain. It did not tear minds apart with violence. It simply removed the foundational fact around which those minds had always organized themselves. For a species like the Karis, that was enough to make every next action uncertain. And uncertainty, at civilization scale, is more lethal than fire. Another cluster of markers turned gray. Then 5 more. Then 9. A ripple was now moving outward from Karis Prime in widening, uneven arcs. Not through space but through the underlying scaffold logic of a species realizing too late that the interior chorus had become empty. Captain Holt moved to Elias's side. "Commander, we're getting non-combat civilian traffic from the outer colonies. Personal channels. Unstructured. Request permission to monitor." He answered without hesitation. "Open it." The bridge audio shifted. At first it was only noise. Clicks. Hums. Sharp tonal bursts in the Karis language layered over one another with increasing disorder. Then the translation lattice began catching fragments. "Answer me. He was here a moment ago. Where is the field? I cannot hear them. Why can't I hear?" The channel cut out. Another came in. "Am I damaged? Something is wrong with the walls. No one returns. No one." That one vanished too. No screaming. No war cries. No heroic final stands. Just a civilization waking inside the first loneliness it had ever known. Lisa's hands had tightened on the edge of the command console without her seeming to notice. Elias noticed. He did not mention it. Captain Holt looked at the graying map. "How fast now?" Elias checked the timer. 5 hours 1 minute and 19 seconds. "Faster from here. Full cascade. Soon." The bridge crew kept working, but all pretense that this was just another watch cycle had disappeared. Every officer here understood now that they were witnessing something no war college would ever know how to categorize cleanly. This was not a battle. This was not peace. This was a sentence reaching its final grammar. Lieutenant Havel spoke again, her voice noticeably tighter. "Karis Prime Central traffic just fractured into local loops. We're not seeing Empire-scale command formatting anymore. It's all short-range retries and failed acknowledgements." Captain Holt said, "Show me." The display shifted once more. Now the screen held a layered visualization of Karis Prime's central signal architecture. Normally it would appear as a luminous net, clean, recursive, stable, every node affirming and receiving in perfect rhythm. Now whole sections of it were blinking out of sequence. Not dead. Lost. Trying to reach a field that had stopped answering as if it had ever existed. Lisa whispered, "They're still trying to be what they were." "Yes," Elias said. "And they can't." "No." The first Dominion core world went gray. Not an outpost. Not a remote military spur. A core world. One of the old centers. It happened so quietly that the bridge almost missed the significance for half a second, because visually it looked no different from the outer collapses. Just one red light becoming gray. But every person on the Resolute understood what it meant. If the core worlds had started falling, then the Dominion was no longer an empire in distress. It was a corpse whose body had not yet finished toppling. Captain Holt drew in one slow breath. Signal all observing vessels. This is no longer classified as localized degradation. Mark official event status. Civilization collapse in progress. Aye, ma'am. The words entered the ship systems and went out across every human command channel, watching the same red field dissolve into gray. On the main screen, the wave accelerated. Worlds. Fleets. Relay stations. Lattice hubs. Gray after gray after gray. Not random. Not strategic. Inevitable. Lisa turned to Elias. What does it look like to them right now? He had known this question would come. Everyone eventually asked it. Politicians asked it to judge moral tolerability. Scientists asked it to understand mechanism. Officers asked it because if you are going to end something, the shape of the ending matters. He answered as he always did. For each individual Caris, the network disappears in layers. First there's delay, then absence. Then the realization that the absence is not temporary. He watched the map while he spoke. They try to reach outward. Nothing comes back. They try to orient around the field they've always lived inside. It isn't there. Memory remains in fragments, but not in relation. Skills survive. Body survives. Language survives, sometimes. But purpose, he paused. Purpose was never fully their own. Lisa swallowed once. So what's left? A living being, Elias said. And no idea what it belongs to. That answer settled over the bridge like dust after impact. Then something new appeared. Corporal Imani Vas at the deep signal station raised her hand sharply. Captain. Single high-priority transmission from Caris Prime. Narrow band. Unrouted. It's not command format. Holt looked to Elias. He nodded once. Put it through. The bridge speakers clicked softly. Static hissed. Then a voice emerged. Small. Dry. Confused. Not translated at first, just the raw Kari sound, stripped of all the majestic collective resonance it normally carried. It sounded thinner alone. Frilier. Like a ceremonial instrument being played with one string left intact. The translation bloomed across the lower screen a second later. Where is everyone? No one moved. The voice came again, shakier this time. Why does no one answer? I cannot feel, I cannot. Where, why am I alone? The transmission broke there. Not cut. Collapsed. Silence returned to the bridge. Real silence this time. No one on the Resolute spoke for several seconds. On the screen, the gray wave continued its patient conquest. Not with explosion. With vacancy. Captain Holt was the first to recover. Record and seal, she said quietly. Corporal Voss nodded without looking up. Yes, ma'am. Lisa stared at the place on the display where Caris Prime had just flickered from red to unstable dim. Her voice, when it came, was almost inaudible. That was the end of a 1,000-year dominion. Elias looked at the graying map. No, he said. That was the first one who knew. Then, at last, Caris Prime itself went gray. No flourish. No music. No fire. Just one more light stepping out of history. By the time Caris Prime went gray, no one on the bridge of the Resolute was pretending anymore. Not pretending this was only a military event. Not pretending this was clean simply because there were no flames. Not pretending that silence was somehow gentler just because it left buildings standing. The main display had changed from a Dominion map into an obituary written in light. Gray markers now outnumbered red by such a margin that the remaining active Caris worlds looked less like a civilization than like the fading afterimage of one. Whole fleet groups had ceased coordinated movement. Relay corridors had gone dark. Colonial hubs no longer responded to command pings because command itself no longer existed in any form the species could understand. And still, the finality of it did not arrive all at once. It arrived in pieces. That was what made it unbearable. A single fleet drifting. A single outpost no longer answering. A single world going quiet. Then another. Then another. Like watching language itself forget its own grammar one sentence at a time. Commander Lisa Wren stood motionless beside Elias, her face lit by the cold wash of the dying map. She had not spoken since the transmission from Caris Prime. Neither had most of the bridge. Captain Holt had returned to giving clipped orders because command required continuity even when history did not. Signal archives were being sealed. Observer timestamps logged. Cross-theater recordings bundled for secure transmission back to Earthside command vaults. Every officer on the Resolute now understood that they were not merely witnessing an operation complete. They were witnessing the moment after which no non-human government in the Accord would ever fully look at humanity the same way again. A communications chime sounded. Not loud. Just sharp enough to pull attention. Corporal Imani Vas looked up from her station. Captain. Another survivor signal. Holt was already moving. Source. Mobile. Small craft or emergency relay. Caris language. Weak but stable. Elias turned. The room followed. Put it through, he said. The speakers clicked again. For a second there was only static and the low hiss of damaged carrier noise. Then a voice. Different from the first. Younger, perhaps. Hard to tell. The Caris had always sounded more certain than individual, because certainty had been the native climate of their thought. Now the one voice on the channel sounded as if certainty itself had become a foreign weather pattern it had once heard of but never lived inside. The translation field struggled, caught, then rendered. I am receiving no return from local cluster. I am requesting guidance. My command node is empty. I do not understand my assignment. Silence on the bridge. The voice continued. There are others here. They look at me. No one speaks correctly. We are waiting. We are waiting for the whole. The transmission faltered. Returned. Faltered again. Please respond. Please tell us what to do. Then it ended. Not in panic. In incompletion. As if the speaker had reached the edge of a life shaped by collective instruction and found nothing beyond it but open dark. No one on the Resolute moved for 3 full seconds. Then Captain Holt said, very quietly, "Archive that under primary historical witness." "Yes, ma'am," Voss replied, though her own voice had changed too. Lisa looked at Elias without speaking. He knew what she was asking. Not operationally. Not politically. Something older. Something closer to the human center of judgment than command. Did you hear it? Yes. Can we still bear what we've done now that it has a voice? That was the real question. Elias turned back to the dying map. Yes, he said, though not to her exactly. That is what it sounds like. Lisa's throat moved once. At the end. At the beginning, Elias said. She frowned slightly. He explained. This is not death in the immediate sense. The Caris still breathe. Their bodies function. Their eyes work. Their reflexes remain. What ended tonight was the dominion, shared command, shared meaning, shared selfhood at scale. He watched another wave of red extinguish. What happens after this, he said, is the part no simulation could fully model. Captain Holt glanced at him. A chance of recovery? For the Empire? No. For the species? He took a moment before answering. Because truth here mattered more than comfort, and because Ellen Marr had asked the only moral question worth trusting, he owed the universe at least the same discipline in return. For some, Elias said, perhaps. Lisa looked at him sharply. You think they can adapt? Not back into what they were. No, she said. Something else. He nodded once. The weapon removes certainty. It does not remove life. Some Kari's populations may relearn local sociality without the scaffold. Simpler, slower, smaller forms of belonging. Family scale. Settlement scale. Maybe eventually culture without dominion. That possibility entered the bridge like a strange and fragile thing. Not hope. Not absolution. But space. Captain Holt folded her hands behind her back again. And the fleets will drift until hunger, mechanical failure, or surrender teaches them the difference between command habit and individual choice. The room took that in. Human officers all. Skilled, disciplined, hard in the place's service makes people hard. But none of them, Elias knew, were untouched by the shape of what they had just seen. Fire was easier on the conscience in some ways. At least fire declared itself honestly. This made everyone on the bridge think of empty rooms, unanswered calls, and the moment a voice asks what to do next when no larger self remains to answer. Corporal Voss raised a hand again. Captain. Last active Dominion fleet in the Marne Belt has gone inert. The main display updated. One more red cluster faded. Only a handful remained now. Lisa drew in one slow breath and let it out carefully. It's over. Elias looked at the map. Not yet fully. But essentially, yes. And somehow that thought did not bring satisfaction. Only wait. It's finished, he said. That was different. Finished things still had consequences. Captain Holt turned toward the bridge crew. Maintain full records until final signal loss. After that, compile observation packets for Earthside Command, Accord Transmission, and Memorial Archive. A few of the younger officers looked at her then, as if the last phrase had caught them. Memorial Archive. Good. It should have. Because whatever this operation had been militarily, it had also become a grave marker for more than one civilization. Lisa said quietly, "You said the galaxy would fear us after tonight." Yes. They should. He did not answer immediately. Not because he disagreed. Because the sentence was both true and incomplete. At last he said, they should fear what patience becomes when it finally stops hoping it won't be needed. She looked at him, and he could see she understood the distinction. Humanity was not dangerous merely because it had built Project Stillness. Humanity was dangerous because it had built it, hidden it, carried it for decades, prayed not to use it, and then used it without hesitation when the line was crossed. That combination was what older species would never fully know how to live beside comfortably. And perhaps they shouldn't. The final red marker on the main display flickered. Held. Went gray. No one cheered. No one stood. No one said a single triumphant thing. Captain Holt's voice carried across the bridge with perfect control. Mark official event conclusion. Lieutenant Havel answered softly. Marked. The map remained on the screen, an empire of gray lights suspended in silence. Elias looked at it for one long moment. Then he reached into his inner coat and touched the sealed envelope with 2 fingers through the fabric. Still there. Still waiting. Ellen Mar's last unfinished task in his keeping. Lisa noticed the motion. Sir. He turned slightly. When this goes before the Accord again, what are you going to tell them? He looked back at the gray field. At the quiet. At the absence where the Kari's dominion had been. The truth, he said. All of it. Yes. She considered that. They'll be afraid. They already are. They may decide that's reason enough to isolate us. Contain us. Worse. Elias gave the smallest possible shrug. That becomes their test, not ours. A corner of Holt's bridge display flashed with the incoming request line from the Concordium chamber. Priority absolute. The Accord had seen enough. They wanted meaning now. Elias almost pitied them. Meaning was always the hardest part. Captain Holt looked at him. Commander. The Accord is requesting immediate explanation. Of course they were. They had watched the impossible become historical fact in under 6 hours. 12 old powers sitting in a chamber built to make younger species feel small had just seen an empire older than some of their alliances disappear in quiet waves, all because humanity had chosen not to rage publicly but to prepare privately. They would want explanation, and judgment, and reassurance. They would get only the first. Elias straightened. Lisa did the same beside him. Outside the hull of the Resolute, the galaxy remained unchanged in all the visual ways that mattered least. Stars still burned. Lanes still arced through dark. Worlds still turned. But beneath that, everything had moved. The old order no longer possessed the luxury of misunderstanding humanity as merely emotional, merely martial, merely young. Now they would have to understand something worse. Humanity was not the species that shouted the loudest in war. Humanity was the species that could build an ending in secret, carry it for decades, and still make room at the heart of the plan for one dying woman to ask if it was right. That was what the Accord would fear. Not just capability. Conscience married to capability. Patience married to memory. Mercy chosen not because humanity was soft, but because it knew exactly how much worse it could have been. Captain Holt broke the silence one final time. "Channel ready, sir." Elias nodded. Then, before turning toward the secure transmission room, he looked once more at the gray map and said the one thing no official record would ever quote, but which he knew was the closest thing to honesty that history would allow. "I hope," he said quietly, "that somewhere in whatever comes after this, they learn how to be smaller and kinder than the thing we ended tonight." No one on the bridge answered. They didn't need to. The ship, the crew, the map, the dead quiet of a fallen dominion. All of it understood the same thing now. Victory had arrived. It had just refused to feel clean. The Concordium Hall was silent when Elias Varen entered it for the second time that night. Not the arranged silence of ritual. Not the old, weaponized stillness the chamber used to place visitors beneath history and make them feel its weight. This was a different thing. A room that had just watched certainty die on a map. 12 thrones curved above the black floor exactly as before. The same polished stone reflected the same lights. The same ancient banners hung in controlled stillness from the upper vaults. Nothing in the architecture had changed. Everything in the room had. Commander Lisa Wren walked half a pace behind Elias, her face composed, her posture exact. Good. Let them see that humanity produced more than one kind of frightening. Not just the man who could stand in the center of their oldest hall and tell them an empire had already ended, but the younger officer who now knew the full shape of it and still walked into judgment without wavering. At the highest central throne, High Convener Salvek did not rise this time. He looked older than he had 7 hours earlier. Not diminished. Clarified. As if some internal luxury of distance had been burned out of him by the sight of one red Dominion marker after another turning gray. No one spoke until Elias reached the black circle set into the floor. Then Salvek said, quietly, "Commander Varen." No accusation. No ceremony. Just the name of the man standing in the space where history had become impolite. Elias inclined his head once. "High Convener." Salvek's long fingers tightened around the arms of his throne. "We have just spent the last hour watching every known Kari's command structure in the galaxy fail." "Yes. We have heard the transmissions." "I know." Another silence. Heavier now. More honest. Minister Osha was the first to break it. She leaned forward, bronze face drawn tight with something more complicated than fear. "Was there ever," she asked, "a point at which this outcome could still have been stopped?" Elias answered immediately. "Yes." The room went stiller. Impossibly. Osha held his gaze. "When?" "Before Meridian Veil. That landed where it should. Not as cruelty. As fact." Envoy Turin shut his eyes once, only once, then opened them again. "So the colony was the trigger?" "Yes." "The operation already existed?" "Yes." "For how long?" Elias did not look away from any of them when he answered. 47 years. This time the silence that followed was not shock. It was recalculation. Every government in the room was revising its own recent past in real time. 47 years of human diplomacy. 47 years of trade accords, border negotiations, scientific exchanges, strategic reassurances, military exercises, and treaty language. 47 years during which humanity had smiled, argued, cooperated, compromised, and quietly carried the means to end one of the galaxy's oldest horrors if it ever had to. High Convener Salvek spoke next. His voice had lost all ceremonial resonance now. It sounded like a tired mind choosing precision because precision was the last dignity still available. You kept a weapon of civilizational extinction hidden from every allied government in this chamber for nearly half a century. Yes. Why? There it was. Not how. Not who authorized it. Why? Elias drew one slow breath. Because if the answer was wrong, if it sounded polished or righteous or proud, then everything Ellen Mar had asked him in the desert room would curdle into hypocrisy. He gave them the only answer he trusted. Because if we had spoken of it, he said, it would have become useful before it became necessary. Several faces in the chamber shifted. He continued. Some of you would have wanted it as leverage. Some as deterrence. Some as a bargaining shadow behind every negotiation with the Dominion. Others would have demanded it be destroyed immediately, which would only have ensured that it was rebuilt in less careful hands the next time fear got large enough. He let that sit. So we kept it out of politics. Out of debate. Out of prestige. We kept it where it could remain what it was meant to be, the last answer, not the first tool. OSHA's eyes narrowed slightly. And you decided unilaterally when, last, had arrived. No, Elias said. The Dominion decided that for us when they killed 82,411 civilians in their sleep. No one interrupted. Good. Let the dead be present in the room, at least once, without being translated into policy language. Envoy Turin leaned forward. And the woman? There it was. The room turning, as every room eventually had to, toward the human center of the thing. The carrier, he said. The volunteer. We heard enough in the bridge records to know there was one. Elias felt Lisa behind him go even more still. He reached into his coat, withdrew the sealed envelope, and held it in his hand without opening it. Her name was Ellen Mar, he said. The chamber listened in complete silence. She was 31 years old. Civilian research assistant. Terminally ill. She was told the entire truth. She asked the moral question every committee avoided. She accepted the mission anyway. He looked up at them one by one. She carried the weapon into the heart of the Dominion because she believed a bad ending could still be made useful if it prevented worse ones. For the first time since Elias had first entered the chamber that day, one of the silent elder counselors at the far end moved visibly. A thin, white-skinned being from the ancient Loran houses, old enough that most officers in the galaxy knew them only as a ceremonial presence, not as an active mind. Now that old counselor lifted one frail hand. What? The counselor asked. Were her final words? Elias answered from memory. Not loudly. Tell my mother I was not afraid. The silence deepened again. He continued because the whole truth mattered. She asked us to tell her brother to be kind to his students. A pause. And she asked us to tell the Karis she was sorry. That broke something in the room. Not outwardly. No one cried out. No one stood. No throne shattered itself on principle. But the emotional alignment of the chamber shifted. The old story, young predator species, patient revenge, quiet apocalypse, suddenly had a face inside it that refused to fit comfortably into fear. Ellen Mar had made the whole thing harder, more terrible, and more human. High Convener Salvek spoke with visible effort. You are asking us, he said, to believe that your species built this in silence, carried it in silence, and used it only when left no other path. I am not asking you to believe anything, Elias said. I am telling you what happened. Belief is your work. Minister OSHA's gaze hardened again. That is convenient. No, Elias said. Convenient would have been lying. That stopped her. He went on. You are afraid now. You should be. Not because humanity enjoys what happened here, and not because we intend to turn tonight into a doctrine for ordinary use. You should be afraid because you have just learned something true about us. He looked across all 12 thrones. We do not respond to existential threats with visible fury. We respond with memory, patience, and preparation measured in decades. That was the line. The room knew it. He knew it. Lisa knew it behind him. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was the new fixed point around which every future diplomatic thought in the galaxy would now be forced to orbit. Envoy Turin asked the next necessary question. How many more? Elias did not pretend confusion. How many more contingencies? Turin said. How many more plans have been built in silence for the rest of us? There was no way to make this answer gentle. Only truthful. 93, Elias said. The chamber inhaled as one. Not a gasp. Worse. The involuntary body sound of old power realizing it has been studied by something younger than itself and more patient than it ever allowed for. One for each non-human species represented in the Greater Accord, Elias said. Not weapons identical to the one used against the Karis. Their vulnerability was unique. But yes, quiet strategic contingencies exist. Osha rose halfway from her throne. You admit this here? Yes. To frighten us? No. To threaten us? No. Then why? Elias looked at her and answered with perfect calm. Because after tonight, if I hide any part of the truth, every future human hand extended in peace will look to you like a glove over a knife. That held the room. For 47 years, he said, secrecy served the operation. Now secrecy serves nothing except distrust. You deserve to know what kind of species sits at your table. Another silence. Then the old Loran counselor at the far end gave a sound that might once have been laughter and had grown into something gentler through age. At last, the counselor said, an honest predator. A few faces in the chamber shifted, uncertain whether offense was permitted. The old counselor ignored them. Younger species always arrive wanting to be mistaken for something more comforting, the counselor said. Stronger, nobler, cleaner. Humanity arrives and says instead, this is what we are when harmed, and this is what we are when left in peace. The counselor's faded eyes settled on Elias. That is not reassurance. But it is honesty. Elias inclined his head once. That was the intention. High Convener Salvek closed his eyes briefly, then opened them and looked very, very tired. You understand, he said, that the balance of the accord cannot remain what it was this morning. No, Elias said. It can't. Many will want isolation. Some will want strategic submission disguised as partnership. Some will argue that humanity must be contained before contingency becomes habit. They may. And if they do? Elias answered without heat. Then humanity will return home and continue existing without their approval. We were a species long before the Accord discovered us. We remain one if it turns away. That was another truth the room needed. Not bravado. Scale. Humans wanted alliance, not permission to be real. Salvek studied him for a long time. At last he said, and if one of us decides that your species is too dangerous to leave standing? There it was. The pure question stripped of diplomacy. Not alliance. Not trust. Can we allow you to continue now that we know what you are? Elias held the old being's gaze and answered with the same stillness he had carried into the chamber the first time. Then you are welcome to try. No one moved. No one breathed. No one had a procedural answer ready for the fact that the youngest species in the room had just spoken the oldest truth in galactic politics. You may attack, but you may not enjoy the result. Then, unexpectedly, Minister Osha laughed. Once. Sharp. Disbelieving. Then again. Softer. Not mockery. Recognition. Soon Envoy Turin gave a breath that was almost the same. Even Salvek's expression shifted by a fraction, not toward amusement but toward the exhausted understanding that the room had passed beyond any prepared script hours ago and was now only trying to remain dignified while absorbing the impossible. At last Osha said, I don't know what to do with you. Elias gave the smallest possible shrug. You are not alone. That drew another brief, helpless sound from the old Loran counselor. Of course, the counselor murmured. Of course the human answers fear with administration. For the first time that night, the chamber's silence became survivable. Not warm. Not safe. But usable. High Convener Salvek rose slowly to his full height. When he spoke now, his voice carried neither command nor accusation. Only decision. The Kari's dominion is gone, he said. History will determine whether that absence is tragedy, justice, or some third thing we do not yet have language to hold. He looked at Elias. Humanity has told the truth of its hand in that ending, and in doing so has changed the political structure of this galaxy in a single day. He turned his gaze outward, to the other thrones. The Accord will not answer tonight what humanity is to become in relation to us. Fear is too fresh, and fear writes poor law. A few heads inclined. Good. At least they knew that much. Salvek continued. But this much I state now for the permanent record. Humanity acted in response to catastrophic aggression. Humanity concealed capability on a scale this chamber finds grave and destabilizing. Humanity also chose a method that ended an empire without turning its worlds into graves of fire. He paused. These truths must remain together. Any future judgment that separates them will be dishonest. That was more than Elias had expected. Not absolution, but fairness. In old politics, fairness is often the highest form of courage still available. The old Loran counselor lifted a hand once more. One additional matter. Salvek nodded. The counselor looked down at Elias. The woman. Ellen Ma. Elias felt the envelope in his hand suddenly weigh more. Yes. I would place her name on the wall of reckonings. The chamber went still again. Lisa, behind him, drew in one sharp breath and contained it. The wall of reckonings was older than the Accord itself, names carved there only when one life had changed the direction of civilizations. It was not given lightly, and never to outsiders. The old counselor went on. She was not of our species. She did not act for our governments. But she entered the darkest place in the known galaxy knowing she would not leave it and ended a horror our fleets and centuries could not solve. That qualifies by any standard worth respecting. No one objected. Not one. High Convener Salvek lowered his head. So entered. The old counselor looked at Elias and said, quietly, bring her letter home. Then return if you wish, and we will show you where her name is carved. Something tightened in Elias's throat. For one moment, after all the secrecy, all the timing, all the measured answers and hard truths, he was simply a tired human man holding a dead woman's envelope in a room full of beings old enough to understand what debt can look like when it finally grows honest. Thank you, he said. It was the only thing in the chamber all night that came out rough. High Convener Salvek lifted one hand. This session is concluded. The old ritual words followed, but they sounded different now, smaller than what had happened, yet still necessary in the way human funerals are necessary even when grief exceeds the size of any prayer. Elias bowed his head once. Then he turned. Lisa fell into step beside him as they walked toward the doors. Behind them, 12 governments remained in their ancient thrones, staring at a galaxy that would not return to what it had been that morning. At the threshold, before the great doors opened, Lisa said quietly, "Do you think they'll ever trust us again?" Elias looked ahead at the corridor beyond, long and dim and leading toward home. "Some will," he said. "Some won't. That doesn't trouble you?" "It does." He touched the envelope in his coat. But trust built after truth is worth more than comfort built on ignorance. The doors opened. Cold corridor light spilled in. He stepped through it. Behind him, the chamber remained full of old power, new fear, and one fresh name waiting to be carved where history could never again pretend not to remember it. Ahead of him was the work that always came after endings: deliver the letter, tell the dead correctly, and go home to a species the galaxy had finally begun to understand. Not because humanity had asked to be admired. Only because tonight it had refused to be misunderstood.